Hello and welcome to Legal View with Michael Ayala. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it. And as you can see, I am joined by a very, very special guest and friend of the show, Dr. Debbie Goodman. I'm sure you've seen her around. She appears on all the major networks. She's also a nationally recognized expert criminologist. She's a professor, an author, and also the host of her own radio and podcast show, Crime Time with Dr. Debbie. Dr. Debbie, thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate you being on the show.
Always a pleasure, Michael, and thank you so much. And again, there's so much to unpack with this case, so looking forward to the conversation with you and your viewers.
Absolutely. And again, we're going to be digging into the Lindsay Clancy case as we're coming up on closing arguments, both sides getting ready to rest their case and make their final arguments to the jury. Again, the defense is representing Lindsay Clancy, claiming that she was unable to conform her acts to the law and that she should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. Of course, the state is actually saying that she premeditated the whole thing and that she is in fact guilty of the murder of her children. And what it's turned out to be, doctor, is this interesting, and we predicted this, we've seen these kind of cases before, this interesting battle of the experts. This idea that one side says that, we examined her and we think she was in her right mind when she did this. The defense has doctors who have actually been working with her over a long period of time who are saying that she suffers from bipolar disorder. She suffers at the time from postpartum psychosis. And also when you add into the mix this toxic mix of medications that she was taking, that sort of triggered this entire event, and she should not be held legally or criminally responsible for that. So, Dr. Quickly, let me just get your thoughts on what we've seen thus far as the battle of the experts are concerned on both sides.
Certainly, Michael, and that really is the appropriate phrase for what we're seeing day to day. We have well-educated, extremely experienced professionals on both sides. So it really is this race to the finish line, and it's neck and neck, really. I've been involved in the case analysis, as have you, for many, many years. But I must say at the onset of our conversation that this case really seems to be not only painful, it's really just a painstaking series of facts here of three little children, Cora, Dawson, Callan, who are deceased at the hands of their mother. But the other side of the coin, the pain of seemingly a loving mother who, according to the defense, was in the grips and the throes of psychosis to the point of just spiraling and really going toward the downhill abyss and not able to make a determination of logical reasoning. So I feel that the case is so polarizing because the country is really divided. Now, we've covered so many cases that I think fall into this category, such as Karen Reed, even upon us recently, Luigi Mangione, even if we dial back to OJ. So these are really the cases in the true crime community that are going to make history, because it almost feels like it's beyond the case and beyond the person, and it's become a movement, if you will. So I think as it relates to Lindsay Clancy, this pendulum, this vacillating between, are we dealing with the madness that the defense wants us to believe, that she was not in her right mind and her thought processes were compromised? Or are we dealing with murder? And we go down the list of what the prosecution wants us to believe, that there was planning and premeditation and it was willful and it was with malice. But these experts are really very, very important here in the minds of the jurors, and whom will they side with? Yet to be determined, yet to come.
Yeah, no question. And I want to touch on something you mentioned a little earlier, this little movement that's going out around surrounding this case. A lot of it has to do with women who have suffered from postpartum depression and in support. I would say clearly the people outside are supporting Lindsay Clancy. And I've heard a number of interviews with them, and they basically said, look, that could be any one of us in there. If you've dealt with this, what that's like. And that could be any one of us. We're just lucky not to be in that position. But what's interesting about this case is that a lot of people, first of all, I want to say what's going on in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because we've got the Dedham situation. This isn't Dedham, but we have the Dedham situation with Karen Reed, where people were out, supporting Karen Reed. Now we've got folks here supporting Lindsay Clancy. I wonder if there's some distrust of prosecutors, because a lot of people are saying she has admitted to killing these children. That's been stipulated to in court. And they don't feel like this is a murder case, that this has been overcharged, and that this is the kind of case that should have been settled with a plea based on the tragedy that surrounds this. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. The idea that the Commonwealth might have overcharged this. There may be some residual effect of the Karen Reed case, right? Try to sort of, cover up on that, whatever. But your thoughts on that? Because I thought it was an interesting argument that I heard the other day.
Very interesting argument indeed. And again, where are we in the line, right? So the line in the sand, is it that the movement is about, and I think in part, indeed, what you're saying, we see individuals wearing the T-shirts, they have the signs, and there is some relatability among, let's just call it the mom club, right? That, as we know, the data and the statistics, and we've discussed that, according to CDC and WHO, 1 out of 10 women will experience some form of postpartum depression. Again, we know categorically it could be mild, it could be moderate, it could be major, but it's the postpartum psychosis that's more rare, and the data points to less than 1%. So that's the part that's not necessarily as relatable, let's say, to most people, because most people have heard depression, or they've known somebody who's experienced depression, or they've heard about insomnia and or anxiety and these types of issues. But then we get into, a real break from reality, and that's not something necessarily that is uppermost in most individuals' minds. So hence why we need these experts to help us, meaning, society, our true crime community. We follow all of this daily, but directly help the jury members understand what it potentially means to be in a psychotic episode, whereby an individual could very well be seemingly adjusted and acting normally and comfortably, and then perhaps moments later there's this complete unraveling of behavior and decision making. So I think the movement in many ways becomes a relatability issue, that people are relating to Lindsay Clancy. Either A, they've been there in, part, maybe not in full, or they just feel moving forward, as you've said, it could be a system failure. Maybe that's part of this movement too, where individuals feel strongly that a mother was reaching out for help and did not get perhaps the exact help that really was needed to prevent this tragedy. And your other point, very well taken, this medicine and the drugs, upwards of 13 different types of medication.
Start quickly with the medication issue. It came up yesterday, I believe, where they were arguing over the jury instructions and the role of intoxication in criminal responsibility. Of course, voluntary intoxication does not excuse any kind of crime. It is not a defense. But this case involves what I would call involuntary intoxication, as sort of the unexpected medical side effects. And that is actually a full defense. Now, the state didn't want that instruction to be given to the jury. The defense said, wait a minute, that's our entire defense, because quite frankly, they're claiming that she had these underlying issues, the bipolar and the depression, very serious depression with postpartum. But it really was these mix of medications that pushed her over the edge. And I heard a doctor talking about this, saying the big mistakes that were made, and I want to get your thoughts on this, was that as they were giving her these antidepressants, she was showing that her body could not deal with them. They were causing problems, insomnia. Then they would get worse when they would double the dose. And no one was paying close enough attention and that's what pushed her over the edge. Would that be a fair assessment if you were going to believe that that was a story? Can and does that happen?
I think potentially. I think that when we go one by one, step by step with these medicines, we need to be looking at the contraindication. So, could it happen? Might it have happened? I think the answer potentially is yes. But then we've got to put the asterisk and kind of hit the pause, if we may, because do we know factually and with certainty, with regularity, did she take the medicine? Were there days where she may have skipped a medicine? Was it taken exactly per milligram dose? That I think is important to know. Who really knows that? She herself may not even know because sometimes, again, when there's mental health compromise and decline, what appears to be an easy answer of, okay, take, X medicine 3 times a day and the time is written out, but when the mental health is declining, does that individual do that? It's a question mark. It's a question mark, but I do think the medicinal theory, if you will, if we want to call it that, is potentially viable.
I would have to agree. It just sounds, again, the way it was put was that, again, when you see these reactions to these drugs, they're very powerful drugs. And a lot of the
Yes.
side effects that you'll read, they're rare, but when they do happen, they can be very, very dangerous. I want to talk about the defense's expert, Dr. Paul Zeisel. He's a forensic pathologist. And he diagnosed it clearly on the stand, saying she had postpartum psychosis, bipolar disorder. Um, the thing about his testimony was that he has been with her from just about after the incident till now, like for 3 years. He says he spent close to 35 to 40 hours with her. And I think that gives him a level of credibility. You talked about the telehealth, you talked about, and we'll talk about one of the other state experts as well, only having spent, much, much less time and much more far removed from the incident in time. But I think the fact that he has spent so much time with her and was in close proximity to the actual event, would you say that that gives a diagnosis by that doctor more credibility than someone who is diagnosing 2, 3 years down the road, or does it not matter?
No, I agree with you, Michael. I think credibility in this case is key, and it is going to come down to, I believe, from the jurors, which experts do they think are the most credible. And I would agree with that statement that this particular doctor, having had more of a lengthy involvement and interaction approach with her, is somebody to view highly. Logically, it just makes sense. It's a lengthy period of time. This case took place 3.5 years ago. And for that type of involvement and interaction, yes, that doctor comes to know the patient, I think, with much more understanding of beginning, middle to the end of what happened and why.
When I look at it logically, I think to myself, I say, okay, if you're a doctor looking at her a day or two after, and you're a doctor looking at her 3 years after, what difference does it really make? Because the event has already happened.
Hmm.
There wasn't a long history of it. It kind of seems like it came on, it happened during that period of time, and then it was over. And you can point to a lot of things that she was doing before, a lot of things she was doing after. So, how do doctors go back and figure out what someone was thinking at the time they did something? And based on how you answer, I'm going to follow up and say, so does it really matter if you're doing that a week, 2 weeks, 3 years after, based on how that's accomplished?
Right. Well, then we also have to note the believability of the patient. So, to the first part of the question, how do we know that what the person said either 2 days after or 3 years after, where is that in the wheelhouse of a doctor making an assessment? It really goes back to his or her own, meaning the doctor's patterns of behaviors, other clients with whom one may have interacted, areas that seem similar. even when we last spoke and we looked at a case of 25 years ago, Andrea Yates, it was 25 years ago, but interestingly, there are some similar factual patterns, are there not, between Andrea Yates and Lindsay Clancy? Interestingly, both of whom were nurses. They had 3 or more children. The piece for me that's still a little delicate, but yet very poignant, is both cases. We had the 1 hour window. Andrea Yates, she waited. Rusty leaves the home before the mother-in-law comes to provide, daycare related help and such. And that was the window of time in which she proceeded to drown her 4 sons and 1 daughter within the 1 hour window. And upon this tragedy, she then calls 911. But with Lindsay Clancy, we've got the 1 hour window as well, maybe 50, 55 minutes of
But
her
she created it,
allegedly.
doctor. Remember, the
Pardon?
difference is Lindsay Clancy created that 1 hour window. At least this is the argument by the state, right?
Yes,
Andrea Yates waited till it
yes,
came. She knew it was coming
yes,
and waited. But in this case, Lindsay, and this is why they're claiming premeditation. She
yes.
created it by sending her husband out.
Correct. So I think even though it's one level and layer to the case, but it could be an important one, because then if I put, the criminologist hat back on and we go down that list of the first degree murder, does the creation of the 1 hour lend itself toward, well, does that mean she planned it and it was already premeditated and she willfully did it and she did so with malice? So that opens that kind of Pandora's box for us.
You know, when we look at the testimony throughout the case, the one thing that I've come away with is I think Lindsay Clancy was suffering from mental health issues and serious mental health issues.
Yes,
And I don't think there can be any question unless you want to believe that she had been planning this thing for years, right? So
I
it
don't
was
think so.
odd to me that they would make the argument that, oh, she was functioning normally and this is just something she wanted to do. I think in some part of the state's case, you had to embrace that there was serious mental health issues with this woman. And they did that, I think, with the expert they called. They almost had to do a 180. And I want to get your thoughts on this because initially they were arguing that the suicide attempt was fake. They were sort of leaning into this whole fake thing that she sent the husband out, she did this, and then she was kind of, the way she went out the window, the way she tried to cut herself, said that this wasn't a real suicide attempt. Well, their experts said, oh, yes, it was. She was definitely suffering from that, but the killing of the children was not the real purpose. It was to make sure that they were safe when she killed herself, that she absolutely wanted to kill herself. So the motive was not killing the children, but killing herself. That's kind of a 180 in the state's case, and I don't know if the jury's going to be bothered by that.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned it because it is a theory in criminology which we refer to as altruistic filicide, and filicide, the death of the child. But you're right. It kind of takes the spotlight off of the killing of the children as the primary motivation or determination, and it kind of shifts to the suicide attempt being the first one. But then you also said something very important and interesting about, did Lindsay Clancy really plan on doing this for any type of period of time? And the answer is likely no. But we know, Michael, in our history, let's just call it evil moms. We have covered those cases, right? Susan Smith, I refer to her as an evil mom. She allowed the car to be put in neutral with little Alex and Michael and into the lake and drowning them in a South Carolina lake so she could seemingly be with a gentleman she wanted to be with. And again, we refer to that as disposal theory. And Lori Vallow Daybell and the death of Tylee and JJ as she was nearing, marriage number 5 and didn't want children. And how about Diane Downs? We're going back in our historical journals here, but a mom who shot her 3 little children one of whom died, one of whom is paralyzed, and the other, thankfully is also alive. But we kind of compare and contrast these moms, right? Because I think some are purposefully killing their children because they simply do not want to be caring for them, and don't want to be, if you will, in their minds, burdened with the responsibility. But with Lindsay Clancy, it really may have been such a slide into the darkness and the depths of depression, which I think then could have transformed into psychosis. And she simply may not have been with the ability to make, these reasonable, logical determinations.
What the state's expert said, I think his name was Dr. Hillebrand. He said, based on the way he reads it, again, I gave you his theory that she wanted to commit suicide, but was really, it was altruistic why she killed the children.
Yes.
Um, but he said the reason he feels that way is because of all the things that happen after, all the things that happen before. Don't suggest, so it's not normal for people to not have hallucinations at all before or after
Mm,
having hallucinations that cause them to do something this awful. What do you
right.
make of that? Because I thought that was probably the strongest point in this entire trial for the
Yes.
prosecution, that the way this thing has played out doesn't quite make sense from a mental health standpoint.
Right. That too, I agree, found it to be a very compelling statement and argument that it would seem so rare to him. And that's what he said, that for somebody who would hallucinate simply to be in that moment in time with a auditory hallucination, however, she didn't experience it before the deaths of the children, nor did she experience it any time after. So now what are we to make of that? Does that mean that the whole hallucination theory is a lie?
Does it? That's what I'm asking you. From your
Yeah.
knowledge and understanding, can it happen that way?
I think it could happen that way, but back to that pause and back to that asterisk, it would be so rare. It would be rare that when there's, it's not just auditory hallucination, by the way, but sometimes people maintain in psychosis that they will see an image and that the image is seemingly directing their conduct or behavior. So whether it's auditory, whether it's imagery, usually, if you will, we're saying usual about something that's so unusual, but it would appear more than an instantaneous moment.
Throw this out at you. This is something of another note I made about the testimony. So, on the defense's expert said that when she killed the children, she said, "Relax, you're going to be with God, or you're going to go with God now." As she right before she would kill them. If the theory of the state's defense expert is right, that she was killing them to sort of uh, to make sure that they were okay and that they could be with her in the afterlife, why wouldn't she have said something to the effect of, "Babies, don't worry, mommy's
Mm,
coming too." You know what I mean?
mm,
Like,
right.
we're all going to be together. It's just something I thought of. I said, if I was, in that situation, what I would be telling the children is, look, don't worry, you're going to be with mommy in just a little bit. Why
Yeah.
say God? It makes it sound like there's going to be two separate places for it.
Yes. And the whole religious theme of what, aspect of this. But if we do go back to Andrea Yates, there was also a religious theme to apparently what happened as well, that she maintained she felt the children would be suffering, if you will, in, regular day-to-day life, and they would be better off in the afterlife. That was part of what her defense was too. But there was no statement there either about, don't worry, we'll be together and all will be well. Now we pan back to Lindsay Clancy, and apparently we have the word safe. SAFE was a word that was also brought up. So what does that mean? Now you're safe. Oh, now I'm relieved. My children are safe. apparently she made that statement. So how do we interpret that? Is that really what she believed, or, question mark? Why was that said?
Just hard to believe, Dr. Debbie, that she's that much of a criminal mastermind. I just struggle with that. But let me ask you about some of the things that were brought on the cross examination of the defense's expert. Um, they basically tried to show that still a lack of remorse on the part of Lindsay Clancy when the state cross-examining Dr. Zeisel, and they talked about the fact that on the anniversary of the killings, Lindsay Clancy's fine. On the birthdays of her children, Lindsay Clancy's fine. All these things. As a matter of fact, they even brought up that when she would work out sometimes, she would use those bands that we know were used in the killing, not the same ones, obviously, but those exercise bands. And they pointed to all those things. I thought it was a bit callous on personally, but they pointed to all those things to say, look, this is another reason why we suggest this is not a woman who's remorseful at all. And this was the result that she really wanted.
Yeah, it is interesting because if we even remove Lindsay Clancy, but we just go with those elements that you presented, very specific notations about the birth dates and no remorse and other holidays and being able to still use exercise bands, it almost sounds like a psychopath that you're describing, because
Yes.
psychopaths lack remorse. And
Yeah.
who do we know in that psychopathic category? Brian Koberger, right? Did he have any remorse? Of course not. Would he ever? No. And then we also look at some of these other moms. Do they have remorse? Susan Smith goes on a national television platform for 10 days begging and pleading, please return my babies. Where are my babies? Knowing all along that they're in the lake deceased. So how do we interpret this? Is she
Especially
far
in light of,
removed?
we saw her break down a couple of times in the courtroom.
Yes. Yes.
And that, I tell you, we've been watching this kind of stuff a long time, Dr. Debbie.
Yeah.
Did not look or sound fake to me.
No, I agree. I don't think it was fake. I think it was genuine. I agree. But now the question is, at the moment in time that decision was made, what was a genuine feeling? What was the feeling that Lindsay Clancy had, if at all? If at all. Maybe there was no feeling. Maybe it was just, according to what she's maintaining through the attorney and through counsel, that it was this hallucination, male voice directing her to kill the children and herself so that everybody would be safe. Do we believe that? Is that a reasonable statement? But here's again the asterisk: by somebody in psychosis? Perhaps. It wouldn't be reasonable for you and I and the viewers, but somebody in psychosis? Perhaps.
It's almost, again, I've said this before, like almost a de facto case in that what the defense has been able to do throughout its case, but even more so during the state's case with basically all the witnesses that they brought in, and Lindsay's own words and writings. This was a woman who was trying very hard, who was a good mother. There was
Yes.
testimony very clearly from Patrick and from the housekeeper and the babysitter that she was a good mother. And
Yes.
she was trying very hard to be as good as she possibly could beyond all of this stuff that she was suffering. And the fact that a good mother goes and does this,
Mm.
I mean, that to me is de facto. It's like, here I have a woman that I hear lots of evidence was a good mother and trying very hard in her writings. It's like, I wish I could get past this feeling so I could have another child, so I could take care of my youngest better, and I wouldn't resent the older children because they don't allow me to take care of the youngest the way I want to take care of him. When you hear all of that, and then she goes and does this, I almost de facto think that's proof that there's something very seriously wrong with someone.
Absolutely, and I agree. I don't disagree that this was a woman in crisis, in this downward spiral of really begging, if you will, begging for help, trying to research best practices, best approaches, best people with whom to speak, to even, put oneself into the hospital, which she did. preceding the deaths of the children. So I think, in fairness to her, she was really trying to figure it out, to understand what she herself was going through. That must have been absolutely horrendous, day to day, of whatever these very deep, dark, troubling thoughts are. Anytime there's any thought, Michael, as we know, any suicidal ideation, that's a terrible thing for individuals to grapple with. And if we may just remind again your viewers, should anybody be in those circumstances or know somebody, we thankfully have the Suicide National Hotline, 988. And so, in high regard, I think when people recognize their own, let's call it, limitations or circumstances that they want to change and are reaching out for help, seemingly she did that, and she did that time and again.
She did. She absolutely did. And I think a lot of people talk about, juries wanting to make someone pay for a crime as awful as this, as tragic as this. And I think the other thing that's sort of flown under the radar is that the defense has made a very good case that the real bad guy here is the system.
Mm,
It was brought out that, this was all going on during the tail end of COVID. Doctors
yes,
were overwhelmed. There were a lot of, that was sort of the advent of the whole telehealth thing.
yes.
And not making excuses for the doctors, but they were overwhelmed. So some things slipped through. They weren't getting full pictures. So when they were diagnosing her or dealing with her, they weren't talking to family members, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the thing I wanted to ask you. One thing that came up in a conversation I had with someone else was that what really should have happened here is that one of those doctors should have put in place with family members a safe plan for the children, so that when she tells Patrick that this is what she's thinking and feeling, Patrick would have known to activate that safety plan, whether it be go with the grandparents or let me just take the kids over here for a little while till we get past this and figure all this out. And that might have made a difference in this kid.
100%. Once again, I'm in full agreement. And again, as tragic as all of this is, at whatever point a decision is made, I think that has to be a talking point moving forward for families to hear that exact message that you're suggesting and maintaining, so that they can have these conversations, because we know and understand it's happening, it will happen, and the safety, security, and survival of the children must be paramount, and that exact plan has to be in place.
Now, how do juries sift through? And we talked a little bit about two different approaches, two different conclusions as to what was going on with Lindsay Clancy. In many of the cases that I've dealt with, sometimes it's just as simple as I like that expert better than I like that expert. But in your mind, how do juries go about sifting through this information? As I said, they both sound kind of reasonable when you look at the set of facts that we're dealing.
That's right. And I think it's going to boil down to two things. We'll say the letter R and the letter C, one of which will be relatability. To whom does a juror most relate and why? And then the credibility. So those two components, I think, together are what's going to happen. And even, I'm sure, as we're speaking and in the days to come, when the jurors are all together and they're going one by one and there's individual discussion, collective discussion, I'm certain that they're going one by one through each expert. And there will likely be discussion, just as we're having now, between us and the viewers, of which expert said what, who agrees with which expert. And I think it really is going to be a tight race. I think it'll be tight. It'll be close, because they're all good. They're all good.
But
Now,
what does that tell you? If it's going to be a close race, who wins a close race in a criminal courtroom?
yeah, but Michael, if I may humbly submit, I don't see any winners in this case.
No, of
This
course. That's
is,
fair.
yeah, I just don't see anybody winning, because we have three deceased children. We have a mother who unraveled and did the unthinkable. We have a country that's really divided on this. And yes, potentially we have a system that may be flawed and may have failed a desperate mother in an attempt to get better. She didn't get better, and it's possible that she got worse.
Before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about something that I was bothered by. Dr. Zeisel, who was the defense's expert, some of his testimony came across as if he was too close to the patient. He almost came off as less of an objective sort of witness,
Mm,
looking at the situation, assessing it, diagnosing it, and more so like an advocate. And number one, from someone in your position, I want to know, is that problematic from a professional standpoint? And then number two, do you think that's something that might have an effect on a jury saying, hey, this guy seems kind of close to this defendant, and whether that would undercut some of his credibility?
right. I would say yes and yes. I think it could potentially be problematic because anytime any expert wears a hat in any arena, there has to be an understanding of professionalism rather than personal. We're not to get personally involved in the case and individuals and show any favor or bias, because then the second part to what you've mentioned is then the credibility becomes questionable. It's almost like the line that's not to be crossed. So even discussing this with my students at the university, they have very strong feelings and they like to just look at the evidence and the facts rather than their own personal views and feelings. And we hope that that's indicative of what the jury can do too. But I would agree that it's not good optics when a professional now seemingly has crossed this invisible line into becoming a little too personally involved and engaged in the case. Now the question mark of credibility could be visible.
All right. And finally, Doctor, you've been watching this trial as closely as the rest of us. Do you have any sense of which way this might go? Closing arguments are set. Kevin Rennington has done an amazing job. The state, there's been a lot of criticism regarding their approach to this. And I've said from the beginning, it's almost as if they're taking this personally, which I think I get it. You know, they're representing the children, they're speaking for the children. I
Hmm.
think at times maybe they've gone a bit too far, but and I believe truly that your comportment in a courtroom can help you win or lose a case. But I'd love to get your thoughts on how you think this one might turn out, if you're willing to do.
Sure. Well, I think that the outcome is going to be she will not be found criminally responsible. I think this jury's going to, see it that way. I think she'll go to a mental health facility. And also, by the way, another potential reason why that could be the outcome is because technically Lindsay Clancy has not gone to jail or prison in the 3-year period of time. So I don't know if the jury will know that or not, but she has been in, I believe, 3 separate types of mental health facilities. And because of that, I think that might also play a role in this, that she's gotten care, whether that's physical, whether that's mental, and now potentially to take her out of that setting, putting her into a prison setting, the jury may feel, not the right move.
Yeah, I think they know where she is because when the testimony of Dr. Zeisel, her doctor, he really made it seem he described her as how she got along with staff and all this. He was explaining it all, so it's clear she wasn't in prison.
Hmm.
The jury wouldn't be told that directly, but from testimony they can infer that clearly she's in a separate kind of place. If not, if she's in a prison, she's certainly in a hospital wing, something very different. But
Right.
he described her as having bad days and worse days, and she's still very much within the throes of these illnesses. So I found that
Mm.
interesting as well.
That is interesting, and we call that in part residual effect. because she might be feeling still the enormity of not only being overwhelmed with her own mental health issues, but now, of course, the recognition, the realization of her own behaviors that have led to the deaths of her own children. I'm sure that's a daily thought and a terrible reminder of what has happened here. So I do agree with you as well that what we see is her emotions and crying. I don't think that's alligator tears. We've all seen that in court in
Yeah,
other
no question.
cases, but I don't
Yeah.
think that's true in her case. I think it's genuine and sincere.
Yeah, I would have to agree. All right, Dr. Debbie, I'll let you go. Any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience, something that you didn't get an opportunity to say or express?
Well, just always appreciative of you and your excellent journalism, and thank you for continuing to keep all of us informed and up to date. And we will all stay tuned to the
Yeah,
program and make sure that we get the exact information as it comes to
yeah.
us. So
No
thank
doubt
you.
about it, Dr. Debbie. Thank you so much for that. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Let me remind everyone about that 988. It's 988, right, Doctor?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, 988 hotline. If you guys are suffering from any kind of issues, mental health issues or anything, please feel free. Call that number. Take care of yourselves. That's most important. Dr. Debbie, again, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Truly appreciate it. Again, she's a nationally recognized criminologist. She's a professor, author, and has her own podcast, which you don't want to miss. It's Crime Time with Dr. Debbie. Dr. Debbie Goodman, thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Michael. You as well.
All right, folks, we'll be seeing you soon. Thank you so much for joining Legal View. Legal View, where we view the news through the lens of the law.